The sky above the major cities had not been blue for 3 years. Instead, it was dominated by the silent, obsidian shapes of the alien fleet. People called them the Silencers. They did not fire weapons. They did not send diplomats. They simply hovered, massive and dark, blocking out the sun and emitting a low-frequency hum that vibrated in the chest of every living person on Earth. It was a sound that caused sleeplessness, anxiety, and a slow, creeping dread that humanity was living on borrowed time. The world had united, not out of hope, but out of fear. Governments had merged their defense systems into the United Earth Defense Coalition, but their weapons remained silent, useless against ships that shrugged off satellite scans like rain. Inside the underground command center beneath the Swiss Alps, the air was cold and smelled of recycled oxygen and stale coffee. Dr. Aris Thorne sat hunched over a console that was cluttered with papers and empty cups. Aris was not a soldier. He was a linguist, a man who had spent his life studying how beings communicate, from ancient dialects to whale songs. Now, he was the last hope of a species waiting for the end. The military leaders in the room wanted to fight. They had planned a kinetic strike, a massive volley of missiles aimed at the lead ship hovering over Geneva. They believed that if they hit hard enough, the aliens would blink. Aris knew better. He had been listening to the hum for 72 hours without sleep. The general in charge of the operation stood behind Aris, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Technicians whispered nervously into their headsets, watching radar screens that showed nothing but static. The general leaned in, his voice low and rough. "We are launching in 10 minutes, Doctor. Tell me you have found a weakness, or tell me to let the birds fly." Aris did not look up. His eyes were bloodshot, fixed on the waveform scrolling across his monitor. He had noticed something everyone else had missed. The hum was not random noise. It was a pattern. It mimicked the decay rate of radioactive isotopes. It was not a song of war. It was a timer. Aris finally turned his chair to face the general. His voice was raspy from disuse. "If you fire those missiles, we die." Everyone in the room stopped moving. The general's face hardened. "That is not an option. We cannot just wait for them to crush us." Aris stood up, his legs shaky from exhaustion. "They are not here to crush us. They are here to clean us." He pointed to the screen. "This pattern matches a galactic containment protocol. We pushed too far. Our experimental quantum weapons, the ones we tested in the upper atmosphere last year, they triggered an automated defense system. These ships are not an invasion force. They are cosmic janitors. And that hum is counting down to sterilization." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the control room. The general slammed his hand on the table. "That is theory, Doctor. My orders are to defend Earth." Aris stepped closer, his eyes intense. "Defense is impossible. Their technology is beyond us. But there is a protocol. If a civilization shows it can self-regulate before the timer hits zero, the system stands down. We have 12 minutes. The general looked at the clock on the wall. 12 minutes is not enough time to negotiate. Aris shook his head. "We do not negotiate. We surrender. Not our land, but our weapons." All of them. The room erupted in arguments. Officers shouted about sovereignty and weakness. Aris ignored them. He turned back to his console and began typing furiously. He knew he could not convince them with words. He had to act. He bypassed the military firewall, using codes he had kept from his previous life in intelligence. The screens around the room flickered. Alarms began to blare. Security guards moved toward him, but the general held up a hand. "Let him work. If he is wrong, we are dead anyway. If he is right, this is the only way." Aris linked his console to the global broadcast network. He was not sending a message of peace or art. He was sending data. He uploaded the deactivation codes for every nuclear warhead, every quantum array, and every orbital cannon on the planet. He broadcasted them directly to the alien frequency, wrapping them in a single packet of information. It was a voluntary lobotomy of Earth's military power. His hand shook as he hovered over the Enter key. This was the hardest thing any human had ever done. It required trusting that the enemy would honor a surrender when they had shown no mercy so far. He thought about his daughter, sleeping in a bunker hundreds of miles away. He thought about the sun, which he hoped she would see again. He pressed the key. The transmission sent. A silence fell over the room, heavier than the hum above. The countdown on Aris's screen ticked down. 5 minutes. The general watched the radar. The ships had not moved. 4 minutes. The hum seemed to grow louder, vibrating the coffee in the cups. 3 minutes. Aris sat back, closing his eyes. There was nothing left to do. They had stripped themselves bare. They had shown they were willing to stop. 2 minutes. The lights in the command center flickered and died, replaced by the emergency red glow. 1 minute. Then the hum stopped. It happened instantly. The pressure in the air vanished. The headache that everyone had lived with for 3 years disappeared in a heartbeat. People in the control room stumbled, grabbing onto desks for balance. On the main view screen, the obsidian ships began to shift. Their solid surfaces rippled like liquid mercury, reflecting the light of the sun for the first time in years. A wave of data washed over the global network. It did not crash the systems. It integrated with them. Every screen in the command center, and indeed every phone and monitor on Earth, lit up with the same symbol. It was not a word, but a concept understood instantly by every mind. It meant probation. Then, text appeared below it, translated into every known language. Probation granted. Do not advance beyond this threshold again. The ships began to ascend. They moved silently, shooting upward into the blackness of space until they were nothing but specks, and then gone. The sky above Geneva was just sky again. Blue, clear, an empty dot in the command center. No one cheered. They were too exhausted, too shaken. The general slumped into a chair, staring at the blank radar. Aris stood by the window of the control room, looking at the monitor that showed the surface cameras. People were coming out of the bunkers. They were looking up, shielding their eyes, not knowing what to feel. They were alive, but they were also powerless. The weapons were gone. The codes had been wiped. Earth was safe, but it was also a child under supervision. Aris turned away from the window. He knew the real work was just beginning. Survival was not the same as living. Humanity had been given a second chance, but the price was their ambition. They would have to learn to grow without the threat of destruction, to find value in something other than power. The general looked at Aris, a mix of anger and gratitude in his eyes. "You saved us," he said quietly. Aris shook his head. "No, we stopped ourselves." That was the only thing they were waiting for. He walked toward the exit, the weight of the future heavy on his shoulders. The aliens were gone, but their message remained. Stop or be annihilated. It was a warning that would echo in the minds of every child born from that day forward. The silence was back, but this time it was not filled with fear. It was filled with the quiet, fragile hope of a world that had learned, too late, how to be humble.